My name is Monk Rowe, and I'm meeting with Eddie Metz Jr. today, a short 12 hours after an awesome gig last night in Hamilton. 9 a.m. for jazz musicians.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't do most of the things I used to do that kept me from
That's
waking
right.
up in the morning. Get older and wiser, I guess.
Yeah. Our bedtime moves up.
That's right, yeah.
I just was very impressed by watching the three of you, Rosanna and Nikki and yourself, with dynamics last night. How and when did you learn the importance of that?
Oh, very early. My dad was a piano player in the Dixieland and swing style. Loved ragtime, but he couldn't quite get the stride thing going. So it was just very great. And he wrote songs. He wrote hundreds of songs and arrangements. And so I grew up listening to music, okay, that had dynamics and had melodies and rhythms. Sometimes, for his style, not so complex rhythms. As I got into the drums, then my rhythm expanded, to be able to do over the bar line and stuff. But till the day he died, he could look at me and say, "Stop screwing around and just play time," And so from my dad came my concept of the time and what the drummer did with the time. Music has the definition of music has certain elements, melody, harmony, timbre, rhythm, and I think dynamics usually kind of gets held out of that, and it's a hugely important part, and it has been since, classical music. You listen to a Beethoven symphony, and it's this grand thing, and all of a sudden it's down to a flute solo, and
Right.
So the dynamics is a huge part, and with Rosano on piano, he's such a dynamic player, and his touch, even when he's playing light, is really very accurate. I don't know if you notice it. When he plays soft, it's unbelievable. And so Nikki and I tried to capture that with him. Like all of a sudden we'll be playing something loud, and then the bottom just drops out. But yet the intensity of the beat continues, and that's a really difficult thing to do in music. I think it's the hardest thing to do in music. I used to hear that with Oscar Peterson records, trio records with Ray Brown and Ed Thigpen. They'd be playing, and all of a sudden the bottom would drop out, and Oscar might be just playing one note.
Yeah.
But the beat continued through, and that's what really impressed me.
I love how I know I physically will lean forward when that happens.
Oh, to listen.
I'm listening so much harder.
Right.
All of a sudden.
Sure.
It's a great effect.
It makes people listen.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll start a concert with Rosano. This trio has kind of evolved into the Rosano Sportiello trio, even though Nikki will front, or sometimes I will front it. It's kind of Rosano's band. It started as my idea, presenting it to Arbors. I'd love to record with Nikki and Rosano, and Matt Domber went, "Okay, when?"
Uh-huh.
Oh, and it's your record. And I was okay, so I did that Bridging the Gap record.
I have it here.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so cool. Like you got a Steely Dan song on there, and
Stevie Wonder.
yeah.
Yeah, but see, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, and probably you too, I had all this jazz coming at me, and I was playing gigs starting at age 14, playing dance gigs on the weekends, and it was mostly jazz. We played 3 rock songs.
Define what kind of jazz it was.
Oh, it'd be standards. Take the A Train.
I'm going to pause for a second and turn off the heater.
Probably over here.
It'll just make some noise. Okay.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I got it. Nope, I
I'm
did
gonna
the
splice this,
same
I'm
thing
sure.
yesterday. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So that was what kind of jazz?
well,
when you
what
say
we
it's
call
jazz?
club dates.
Yeah.
Standards for dancing at a country club in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So we played bossa novas, we played rumbas, we played cha-chas, we played straight ahead jazz songs, Duke Ellington ballads, nothing too fast, nothing too slow. It was businessman's bounce.
Yeah.
And ballads were at like da 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 da. That was about as slow as it got. And then the faster tune. Da da da. Da, 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 da. It was for dancing, nothing too fast, nothing too slow. So that's where I really cut my teeth. I also was playing Dixieland gigs at a local pizza place. So I was getting that. But then on the radio, I listened to all this rock and roll. The Rolling Stones and the Beatles and, you know, whoever else was popular in the 60s and 70s. And I loved that music also. In fact, I just did a rock and roll record last year.
Oh, neat.
It's a remake of Ride, Captain Ride.
Oh,
Remember
that's
that song?
a great song.
Yeah, Blues Image is
Blues
one
Image.
surviving member, Mike Panera, who wrote that song. So I did this whole new rock and roll record with them.
Wow.
He also was part of Iron Butterfly, and they did Inagata to Be.
No kidding.
Yeah, so this is the official remake, but that's another part of my career.
Yeah, right.
You know,
Well,
we're talking about
versatility,
jazz here. So growing up playing standards, learning those songs.
Do you remember the first time you got paid to play?
Yeah,
What did you make?
I made $36.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah, that was in about 1971, 70. I was in 7th grade
For
or
the
8th
first
grade.
gig, I made $4.
$4?
Yes. So
Yeah,
you
and
did
this
good.
was actually on a TV show
Oh.
with the local pizza parlor Dixieland band.
Uh-huh.
And so it went through the union too. I had to become a union member, so it
Oh.
had taxes taken out of it and everything. So, you know,
They were the real
I felt
thing.
like, hey, I was in 7th grade. What did I know? $36. That went towards my new pair of hi-hats that cost $100.
Speaking of hi-hats, we're going to veer off here, but there was a couple of moments last night where you literally were just playing your hi-hat and the snare and almost pretending to play the bass drum.
Yeah.
And the power in that, I'm just sort of mystified by it sometimes. Hard to teach, I think.
Yeah. I know when it comes down to the time of the music, that's the pulse, and that's the quarter note. Quarter note gets a beat. For those of you who don't, you know, are watching this who don't know anything about music, quarter note is the beat. You know, there's the beat right there, and those are quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, when you can master just playing quarter notes in a steady tempo and not waver no matter what's going on around you, then I think you've really kind of stumbled onto something. Maybe not stumble, that's what your goal was. Now, the famous drummer Peter Erskine, who's unbelievable, one of my heroes, he has a thing out on YouTube now where he's playing all this stuff at the very beginning for about a minute, and then he stops and he goes like this. Quarter notes on the hi-hat, that's it. No opening and closing, just quarter notes. And he said, he looks at the camera and he goes, if you can't do this for 3 minutes without wavering, then all the other stuff is just a bad imitation of good drummers. And I thought that was beautiful. That was right up my alley. And I've never met Peter. I've always loved everything he did. I saw him at Carnegie Hall in 1976 with Maynard. Phil Woods opened that concert and they wouldn't let him off the stage. It was with Harry Leahy and Malillo and Bill Goodwin and all that great quintet.
The Showboat group.
Oh my God, it was on, and they didn't want to let them off the stage. In fact, Maynard's band was sitting on the stage watching them going. And they looked at Maynard. Maynard went, "Go ahead, play another one. I don't care," you know.
Wow.
And it was just killer. And so Peter was with Maynard at that time. So it was more rock and roll Maynard Ferguson. And so to see him go and play straight ahead jazz, I did hear him when he was very young with Kenton, I think 19 years old or something, just a powerhouse of a player. Now he can do all this delicate stuff. And it just, again, the intensity of the beat when you're playing soft and doing that. And I picked that up from, I saw Gus Johnson one time. We were watching him on that video.
Right.
I went to piano solo, and he went just a hi-hat, closed hi-hat, and nothing else. And it still was swinging. And I was like, it can be done. Yes, it can be done. You don't have to play all that extra stuff. When it comes down to the quarter note, just play it. Now, the subdivision might be different. Like a drummer like Connie Kay from the Modern Jazz Quartet played his jazz beat very even eighths. Did you ever notice that?
Yeah.
Okay? Or if you got to somebody like Jake Hanna or Buddy Rich or Max Roach or any of the bebop drummers, their beat kind of went. So there was that in between that mystified me most of the time. It's like, well, Connie Kay can get away with it and playing straight eighths in a jazz sense, and these other guys can do it with a triplet feel, which is the jazz swing feel, first and third note of a triplet, right? Da, 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 the shuffle feel without the middle note. The ride cymbal pattern for drummers, that's where that comes from. Da, 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 da. So if you're subdividing, da, 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 now it's hokey when you go. It's like a shuffle.
Yeah.
But when you have it in the ride beat, and it's constant and it's steady, I think it helps everyone just not worry about where the beat is, and then they can play the bass or got a piano. How do they do it? I have no idea how they do it. All the notes and everything. I'm just hitting things with pieces of wood, you know. He's over there actually. But I have to give the support, so it all comes back to the quarter note again.
Right. What's the role of ego in this, what you're talking about? If you have to be happy, Peter Erskine saying, you better be able to do this and nothing else for a while.
If you're called upon to do that.
Yeah.
You know, now sometimes some guys would never think of doing that, maybe because they can't do that, or it's just so simple of a concept. That, less is more right now for me.
You have to like space, I think. There's some drummers that I play with on occasion who just feel any space that comes up, that's mine,
fill it
I'm
in.
going to fill it in.
Yeah, you mentioned the ego. With this trio, there's no ego. It's if somebody throws out an idea, we usually all jump on it. A rhythmic thing for me, or Rosanna will play something. If you notice when we're playing, all of a sudden Rosanna will play something, or Nikki, and we'll all just smile all at the same time. Whether it's a quote, a funny quote, or a rhythmic thing, or some funny melody line, And so we really listen to each other intently when we're playing, and that's another big thing about music. You have to be able to have the proficiency on your instrument to just be playing while you're listening to everything else that's going on. We're going to talk about musicians listening to each other while they're playing. The bigger the band, the harder it is to maybe zero in on one instrument. With a trio, it's just the piano, bass, and drums. And the balance that goes out to the audience before it even reaches the PA system. Like we played acoustic last night. My problem would have been playing too loud for the piano that's not mic'd. I don't think there was any balance problems last night.
No.
But again, back to playing as soft as you possibly can with the intensity of the beat. I think it's the hardest thing to do in music.
You had a path, like you were going to go into business or something like. Do you college?
I went in high school. I graduated high school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in 1976, and was accepted at Berklee College of Music in Boston, and placed in the #3 big band as a freshman. I was like, wow, okay, I guess I'm pretty good at what I do, or what I'm doing here, and I'd love to go to Berklee and be a musician. And my dad was a musician, never a full-time musician. He was an investment banker and, kept the food on the table and that. He could have been a professional musician had he gone that way, but he decided not to. He was raised a different way. So when I decided to go into music, he was like, I don't think so. Even with an acceptance to Berklee with a full ride. And I didn't go. I'm not going to say it's a regret, but I wonder where my career might have gone if I'd gone that direction. So that was 1976. Instead, I stayed in Ann Arbor. I didn't go to University of Michigan. I went to Eastern Michigan, 5 miles down the road in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And was in business school. I was a marketing major for 3 years. So the first year was easy. You get Algebra 101 and Psychology 101 and English 101. And you get to the second year and you get things like business law and business classes, how to write a proper letter in a business form with the headings and all of that stuff, and memos and all that stuff you need to do when you're in business. And I started going like, I don't know if this is for me. And in the meantime, I'm still in my hometown playing gigs Friday and Saturday nights. I didn't hang out with the guys at the dorms. I went and played gigs. I was making $75 a night as a college student. $150 a week.
Yeah.
I bought pizza for everybody. Because I was in the dorms. And so I was in college, just partying, having a good old time, playing my gigs, and going to being in the marching band and being in the concert band and being in the jazz band at Eastern Michigan. And eventually I said, I just stopped going to my academic classes. Went to music classes and became a huge pothead.
Uh-huh.
It was the 70s. It was the thing to do.
You're diving into the whole thing.
Yeah, drinking and smoking pot and girls and all that stuff. And I was just happy going to band and playing gigs on the weekend. I said, hey, this isn't terrible. Forget those classes. So essentially, technically, I flunked out of Eastern Michigan. Mm-hmm. And so I laid off a semester and went back on my own dime. I went and found a day job, along with doing the other gigs, and got my own apartment and went back as a music education major, taking clarinet and theory and all that stuff. I got a 4.0. Back then the 4.0 was the highest you could get. That's straight A's right down the board. And I mailed my report card to my dad. And I said, Dad, I'm thinking of coming to William Patterson College in New Jersey. They have a jazz program there. I really want to be a professional musician. He was like, well, okay, you've proved it to me that you really want to do this. So I moved to New Jersey, where my parents had lived. They moved there in the middle of my senior year of high school, but I had stayed out there.
Oh.
Another traumatic story, but that's okay.
Okay.
And I'm over it.
Uh-huh.
And went to Eastern as a music major, moved back to New Jersey, went to William Patterson College in Wayne, New Jersey, entered the jazz studies and performance, and they accepted me. And I transferred enough academics that I had taken at Eastern and actually passed to transfer and only take music classes when I went to William Patterson. That was great. That started in 1980. 2 years later, a friend of mine was playing with Grover Mitchell. He was playing trombone in the Basie band. He had a band that was playing at the Red Parrot in New York City and the Rainbow Room, back and forth, when the Basie band wasn't on the road. And it was all the Basie guys.
Oh.
So a friend of mine was John Melito, a trumpet player. He'd been in Clark Terry's last big band. Said, Eddie, put a cassette together. That's a cassette.
Yeah.
And we're having drummer problems. The drummer's terrible. He said, just, get me a cassette as soon as you can. So I put it together that night, got it to him. He took it to the gig and gave it to Grover. I didn't think anything of it, thinking maybe the next time Grover gets his band together after the Basie band's not on the road, that he would get that job and stay in school and just do that. And about 3 months after I did that, I got a phone call. It was Labor Day, 1982, and it was Count Basie calling me.
He called you personally.
Yeah, I had all my information on the cassette, and what had happened was Grover was listening to it on the bus, and he said, "Hey, Basie, here, listen to this." This Greg Fields was getting ready to leave. Maybe we could check this guy out. I had big band stuff on there, and I said, "Yeah, sure." So Basie called me personally. I said, "Who is this? Who's messing with me?" He said, "No," and then I recognized the voice. I was like, "Oh my gosh!"
Did he call himself Count? Do you recall, or did he say?
I think he called himself Bill.
Bill Basie.
Yeah, and guys called him a various assortment of names.
Yeah. Right.
Bill, Chief. I called him Chief.
Okay.
Some guys called him Count. Other guys called him Boss. It didn't matter. He was just so well respected. He was a great guy. So yeah, I get the the call from Count Basie. He says, "Sonny Cohen, the manager, will be calling you shortly, and he'll let you know all the details." He said, "But we want you to join a band starting October 8th. That was Labor Day, so that's like 6 weeks. I was registered for school already to go back to school, and actually I had just finished. It was amazing. My girlfriend at the time, who became my first wife and the mother of my children, we were sitting there watching the Jerry Lewis telethon, and they just had Sammy Davis from Harris in Lake Tahoe. I'm like, oh man, wouldn't it be great to get a gig like that? And I swear, 5 minutes later the phone rang and it was Basie on the phone. It's like unbelievable. 2 months after I joined the band, we were sitting on the same stage at Harrah's in Lake Tahoe with Sammy Davis.
You want to pinch me.
And every night, yeah, and every night I got to play 3 songs with Sammy. The Basie band would do about a half an hour warm up. And then Sammy would come out, we'd do 3 songs. The first one was My Shining Hour, I'll never forget it, was fast as hell. And a lot of drum stuff in it. And actually I have Sammy Davis come up and say, yeah, great job, you know. Or Basie just looking up and smiling, you know, knowing that he's smiling at me because everything seems okay with the band, you know. Freddie Green was kind of a grumbly old man, but he didn't ever say anything. Actually, I used to get this from Freddie Green. I'd see his arm moving,
Yeah.
and then I'd see his arm stop, and I knew it was coming. He'd go like this. So as a young guy, 24 years old, Freddie Green's turning around, just kind of shaking his head and looking at you. I'm going like, what am I doing wrong? I thought it felt great. And then Cleveland Eaton, the bass player, would lean over and go, don't worry about him. I'm like, what? Don't worry about Freddie Green? Come on. So there was all this stuff going on. I was like, wow, what have I gotten myself into?
Oh, man.
After the first song we played, the first night, I'll never forget, Toledo, Ohio, Masonic Auditorium, 2,000 people in the audience. And we played Wind Machine, the first song was always the first opener. Sammy Nesta goes, and like a bat out of hell. When we got to the end of that, the very first song I played with the band was Wind Machine. I was shaking so badly. Physically, I was behind the drums just going, I can't believe this is it. Of course, the next tune was, God, I forget, it was a blues. And Basie starts out, da-da-da-da-da. You know, typical Basie blues of second tune. My hand was shaking so bad I couldn't play those quarter notes I was talking about. Because I wanted, you know, closed hi-hat and hi-hat stand clicking. I couldn't do it. My hand was going like this. So Cleve's going, settle down, relax. I'm going, I'm trying. Eventually, you know, I kind of settled in, but, you know, 24 years old and no rehearsal. There was no rehearsal. My rehearsal was in the dressing room with Basie saying, is there anything I should know here? You know, I'm only 24 years old. Why did I get this gig? He says, I'll just kick him in the ass. I haven't had that in a while. Like,
That's why he wanted.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess he felt my energy.
Wow.
Now, I wasn't the most technical, and I never have been the really most technical drummer like a Buddy Rich or a Butch Miles, who was my teacher when I was growing up for a year. Butch was my very first drum teacher.
Oh.
It was great. He taught me all kinds of stuff. He goes, you got the time. He goes, I just have to teach you the tricks. Yeah. The tricks of the trade. So he did. He showed me all kinds of stuff. And technique. We worked on technique, of course. But,
I love this story, your Freddie Green story, because I have a story from the bass player Jimmy Lewis, who was with the small group in the early 50s.
Oh, yeah, like a Kansas City 5 or
basically
something.
told the same thing. He said,
Yeah.
Freddie, he says, the time starts to get away, he would just look at you.
Yeah, he didn't
right
tolerate
here.
it. I know.
And
And yet I've heard on Basie Records, like with Sonny Payne near the end of his career with the band, he and Freddie were fighting all the time. You can hear it a couple of times on Sinatra at the Sands, live at the Sands, just a couple of times. And then there's it came out, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, the set that the Basie band played before Frank Sinatra came out, the dinner set. So you can hear all the people, you know, silverware clanking and people, and you got the waiter guy yelling, you know. And maybe the mob guys sitting down in front, you know, because Frank was there. You know, bring me my food, you know. You can hear all that, but the Basie band, they are just smoking. But there's times where Sonny Payne and Freddie were just rubbing each other.
Was Sonny like on the
I
forward
think,
side of the beat, or
yeah.
just?
It's kind of hard to explain. I think at the time, I shouldn't say anything that's really not true, but I think Sonny was drinking a lot at the time, and he knew he was kind of on the rocks with the band, because the band really didn't care for him, because he was such a showman, and always stole the spotlight from whoever was up there, you know, throwing the sticks around and doing all that. He was one of my heroes, but I did hear those things, stories about him that it was kind of different. And talk about ego, you know, that's probably what got in the way there. So when I was on the band, I was just trying to be, you know, I was one of 4 white guys. There never was any racial indication from anyone on the band, from the top to the bottom. Nothing about black and white, no racial stuff, which was relaxing, because those guys had gone through all that racial stuff, you know, staying in separate hotels, one of the famous black bands. And yeah, you can come in and play the theater, but you got to leave the back door and go to the other side of town and stay at the black hotel. You know, they'd been through all that. There was no...
Did they talk about it?
No, but there was no racial fighting at all. 4 white guys, I was one of them. Eric Schneider was a tenor player from Chicago. Dale Carley was playing lead trumpet at the time. He's from Silver Springs, Maryland. And Bob Summers was another trumpet player. We were the 4 white guys. There was never a black and white issue on the band, which made it so relaxed, you know. Because there could have been, very easily. You never know. Guys, like Miles, he didn't hide his racial preference. He told everybody. He crazy white man.
When you first got on the Basie bus, was there a question like, well, where do I go?
No, it said new boy in the back. That's what they said. Sonny Cohen, your seat's in the back right in front of the toilet. Okay, yes sir. No problem. And then across the aisle was Cleveland Eaton, as he'd take the bass and lay it on the back seat and then strap it in. So it was the big long back seat in the bus, and the toilet. Cleveland was that seat, and I was the one across from him. And in front of me was Danny Turner and Bob Summers, and all the way down to the front seat where Basie was. There was a lot of really cool stuff. And at the time, we didn't take any bus trips longer than 3 or 4 hours.
Oh.
We flew everywhere, which is a real luxury, because like the Glenn Miller Band, they still live on the bus. 48 weeks a year on the bus. Of course, to get to Europe, you got to fly and things like that. But one-nighters on the bus. We had Greyhound buses meet us at the airport, take us to the hotel, take us to the gig, back to the airport. We did the longest bus trip, I think, was 3 hours.
Did you have to play a different set of drums every night?
No, I had my drums with me.
That went on the plane?
I had hard cases, yeah. This was all pre-9/11, of course, in 1982. Hard cases for the drums. Sonny Cohen would get out of the bus first, say, we've got this many bags and this much equipment, and pull out a Ben Franklin. Who wants to help us? And the Skycaps ran, you know. At the airports, they'd see Sonny get off the bus, and they'd all run towards him, you know, to make the big tip, because you could push luggage through then.
I see.
There wasn't extra luggage charges. Now, Jeff Hamilton, he travels with his drums, and it's in his contract that they have to pay all the overage charges and everything. He's got 6 extra cases, all under 50 pounds.
I remember that when we started doing these interviews. We had 9 road cases of stuff. The stuff was big. And
yeah, the Basie Band had those road cases, all the music. There was 3 music cases. There was a great big huge box that had mutes in it, all the trombone, big huge trombone mutes, and there were stand cases. They had the old band front stands, metal ones that were heavy. The drums, the bass amp had a road case. So it was like, I don't know, 12 or 13 pieces of equipment, and then everybody had a suitcase and a carry-on. So thank God it was pre-9/11.
Basie was in his declining years.
Yeah, he was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
I think he'd had a stroke in about 1979, 78 or 79. Yeah. Butch was on the band at the time. And that was when I really became a fan of the band. When my teacher got the gig with the Basie Band, I was like, whoa. So then I immersed myself in the Basie thing. Bought all the old records, like April in Paris and Standing Ovation, Live at Birdland, all of that stuff. Atomic Basie. And I just studied it and studied it. I had 95% of the book memorized when I got there.
Where did Duffy Jackson fit in that?
There were 4 white drummers in a row. From Butch, who got the gig, I think, in 75 through about 79. Then Duffy for a year. And then Greg Fields was there for 2 years, and then I was there for 6 months. And then Dennis McCrell was after me.
Right.
In 1983 he came in. Yeah. So I'm just honored to have my name in the list of people, you know. It doesn't matter that I didn't record with them or that I didn't do any extensive touring. It was all domestic. Yeah. I just missed a tour to England. I just missed a tour to Japan. It's like, you know, I don't care. I was there to sit from the drums To look down from the drum where the drums were and look down and see Count Basie at the piano was unbelievable, and I'll never forget it. As a 24-year-old guy, that was 32 years ago now. I'm 57 now. So. Phew.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's pretty amazing. So to play with guys like Bucky and the guys that I've had a chance to record with over my career, Bob Haggart, bass player Bob Haggart, Kenny DeVerne and Bob Wilbur, Dave Frischberg, jazz guys like that, just working with Bucky and seeing him this morning, having him say, "Come here, give me a hug. I love you, man." That's all. It makes it all worthwhile. It's unbelievable. I'm gonna cry now.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. They seem to have, maybe it's just the lives they've led.
Oh yeah.
Maria Schneider said something about that. She says you have to live a life if you want to. You can't just play music.
Right.
You have to
live it. That's right. Yeah. And it's true for any music. You know, look at the rock and rollers. They live it. Why don't the jazzers? Well, they did for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, I think back, I was heavily influenced by the 52nd Street Eddie Condons and Jimmy Ryans and that whole scene there in the 50s. Hugely influential. I just bought all the records I could.
Yeah.
My dad had a lot in his collection too. He wasn't so much of a big band guy. I started the big band collection. Dad had Ray Charles records and Oscar Peterson Trio and Sergio Mendes.
Oh yeah.
You know, that was how I practiced my bossa novas. Sergio Mendes in Brazil '66, and I still listen to it to this day. But then the rock thing for me too. I practiced to the band Chicago. I loved that band Chicago. And Danny Serafin, the original drummer, I've recently gotten in touch with him.
Nice.
I teach at a band camp 2 weeks out of the year near Sacramento. It's a traditional jazz camp. No, we don't read any music other than lead sheets. So it's all improvised. And the teachers will play and say, here's the role of the clarinet, here's the role of the tenor, here's the role of the trumpet. And try and teach the kids how to play music totally improvising, like jazz groups do. Mm-hmm. Pick a tune and play. So we're there, and I had a student who has become my #1 fan. He has a show in California called Percussion Discussion. And it's an NPR show. It's just in California now. And he interviews all kinds of drummers. So Danny Serafin, the original drummer from Chicago, who disappeared for a long time, I never knew where he went, had a falling out with the band and just took his money and went, has now reappeared on the scene, wrote a book about his experience with Chicago and growing up as a tough kid in Chicago. And Jim got an autographed copy of that book to me. And I was like, wow. Because I told him Danny Serafin had a huge influence on me on the rock thing, playing with rock bands, like with horns. Chicago, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Tower Power, all the funk bands, all the rock bands. But Chicago was my most favorite, their first record.
Their first record, yeah.
I used to put that record on and run down the stairs to the basement to try and hit the first note. You know, in the time that you would drop a needle down the stairs and try and hit the first note. Get about 12 seconds.
Your stereo was upstairs.
Dad's stereo was upstairs. So I'd put on a stack of records on the long spindle, you know, remember? And it would drop one by one. And he had sent wires through the air conditioning and heating ducts downstairs, so I had a little stage for my drums. This is the man that didn't want me to be a professional drummer. He did all that for me. Finished basement, heat down there, and in the wintertime, and speakers right here for me. You know, it's kind of pre-headphones and of course, pre-iPod and all of that stuff. We practiced the LPs. I put on a stack of records, and the first one always was Chicago Transit Authority. First side. Very first song, Introduction.
Yeah.
And then, does anybody really know what time it is? And then Beginnings. And then usually I'd go up and take the whole stack off and then flip it over. And it was Question 67, 68, Listen, all those records. I loved them. And to this day, I can still play them note for note. That's how much I practiced.
Wow.
So I sent a note I wrote an email to Danny telling him what it influenced. And he says, next time you're out near San Francisco, give me a call, we'll get together and have lunch. I'm like, oh my God. Because I guess Jim maybe played him a couple things that I'm on. So those kind of things, as I'm getting older, I'm appreciating those things more and more, to meet my heroes, in my career, to have been able to record a record with, essentially was Soprano Summit. DeVerne, Wilbur, Bob Haggart on bass, Dave Frischberg on piano, and Bucky, and me on drums. There's an Arbors record called Reunion at Arbors. And it's a Soprano Summit. I grew up playing along to those records. Rosengarten, and Bucky was on those records, and Milt Hinton. I got to play with Milt. I got to play with George DeVivier. I got to play with all those people we saw at least one time. George DeVivier, I played 2 sets with him. Unbelievable.
I'm jealous.
Just great. Well, just
it's great.
It is, and I don't want to spout it or anything, but all these guys were part of musical history for jazz history, which I don't know is kind of, it seems to be not ignored, but not as many people know about that part of jazz as when Miles and Coltrane were coming through at the same time.
Right.
Everybody's attention kind of went that way.
Yeah, as if that's where things really started.
Right. Well, if you go back before then, it was the Dixieland guys, and it was Louis Armstrong. Mm-hmm. And all those guys I worked with, we'd talk about music and things, and invariably someone would say, well, Louis was the guy. He made it possible for everyone else. Louis Armstrong, if Bix hadn't died, where would his career have gone? How influential would he have been? Mm-hmm. To maybe hear him on a more modern recording and on some of that old stuff, which is wonderful stuff with Frankie Trumbauer and Chauncey Morehouse on drums. But it was old style recording.
Right. It's kind of a shame because people listen to it and because of the sound of it, it's easy to sort of dismiss.
Right. And I think the younger guys have a problem with it because it's so diatonic. Mm-hmm. When you're playing Dixieland, there's not too many sharp 9s or flat 9s or flat 5s. Eddie Condon used to say, those modern guys, they flat their 5s. We drink them. Or flat their 5ths, so we drink our 5ths. That was the famous Eddie Condon quote. So, but I think that part of music history, that the improvised 6 or 7 piece band, like at the jazz parties, watching that video last night, that was great. I loved seeing that. I'd love to get a copy of that sometime. Is being forgotten about.
Yeah. To me, I've got this idea that most of it is too happy to be taken seriously as an art form.
Yeah, it is a happy music.
And for some reason, the scholars and so forth doesn't have enough, I don't know, trauma to it or something.
Well, some players think it's too constraining, harmonically. But, I played with Wild Bill Davidson several times. Oh my God, that was unbelievable. His energy and the way he would lead the band through and out choruses was outrageous. Pee Wee Irwin was the same way. Warren Vichet can do it, and that's the bag he was coming out of. Mm-hmm. Warren grew up listening to Bobby Hackett. Nobody remembers who Bobby Hackett was anymore. Oh my gosh.
Well, someone does.
Well,
Rosanna,
I know, sure, of course.
Right.
And luckily I've been able to play with people who, my dad got to play with Hackett one time and actually did a little recording with it. It came out years later. But he's like, he would start every song by clicking his ring on the bell for the tempo so the band could hear it over the crowd talking. This little kind of clinking sound, Everybody knew where the tempo was. Yeah. And Ernie Hackett was playing drums on there. I did go one night to see that. I was at the Pontchartrain in Detroit.
Well, you got all these great gigs you've played. This is a sort of a hard question. Do you recall your worst gig ever?
Boy, oh boy. There could be a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
A couple of gigs I learned my lesson early to not overindulge. Mm-hmm. Especially drinking. I don't drink anymore, and I never had a problem with it. I just don't care for it anymore, the way it makes me feel. A couple of times with a rock band, getting a little too drunk to play, and they were my good buddies. We'd played together for a long time. Piano player Tom Hook is looking at me. I go, I'm sorry. He's like, all right, get out of here. And he finished the night by himself on piano, you know, playing Tom Waits songs and things like that. But yeah, things like that. Gigs where we were always too loud. Turn that PA off. Well, we don't have a PA. We're a jazz group. We're just playing for dancing. You guys are too loud. Turn that PA down. We don't have a PA. There's a microphone so they can do speeches, so they can do the toast. That's all.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. You're too loud. It happens all the time. People see the drums coming in, and they do not sit near the bandstand.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't understand that I could probably play drums quieter than anybody. You know?
Yeah.
So, worst gigs would have been more like dealing with food and beverage managers
Right.
instead of the other musicians.
What was your? You spent quite a few years at Disney World.
I did.
And I think I read in some of your bio information that they eventually cut back
Yeah.
on their music.
I went to Florida in 1985. I'd gotten married and had a kid. PJ was born in October of 84. October of 85. And we were living in Flemington, New Jersey at the time. I was working in Allentown with a guy named Park Frankenfield, who was big in the Lehigh Valley area. Again, a band organizer who had a big band, a small group, and a steady Friday and Saturday with a quartet. And he played keyboards at the time, although he was mostly a trombone player. Jack of all trades, he played everything. And I was also working in the summer at Great Adventure Amusement Park, Jackson, New Jersey. So Flemington was halfway between the two. So newly married, with a new kid, Great Adventure was closing for the season. Park Frankenfield was moving to Vero Beach, Florida, and all my work was gone. I was doing Monday nights with Woody Allen at Michael's Pub, at the old Michael's Pub, 53rd Street, for $50 on Monday nights. And that was the extent of my gigs. I had a wife and a kid. So I had gone to the Sacramento Festival with Park Frankenfield, the Sacramento Jubilee, which at the time was the largest jazz festival. We went 120 bands and 50 stages, and it was my first jazz festival I'd gone to. I was like, this is amazing. And I met some guys from Orlando who were there with the Rosie O'Grady's band, Bill Allred being one of them, trombone player. And especially Davy Jones became a quick friend of mine there. I met them. He said, where are you from and why don't you move to Orlando? And I went, well, okay. He goes, come down, stay at my house. I'll take you all over. I'll introduce you to everybody. Huge music scene. Now, not a jazz scene, just music, you're living in the trenches in the music business, conventions, the theme parks were there. Universal wasn't there yet, but Disney was there. And at the time, Disney had 400 full-time musicians. Salary and benefits. No, hourly wage and benefits. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay. So I went down, I tried out for Disney, stayed at Davy's house, and tried out for Disney. They're like, okay, move down here and we'll status you. Because it is a corporation, large corporation. So you got to go through all the initiation and, not initiation, that's the wrong word, but orientation,
Yeah.
and get your ID card and get on the books and all that stuff. I went down there and moved down there with my wife of a year and a half, and my son was 3 months old, December of 1985. And in April of 86, I had a full-time job at Disney in 4 months. In the meantime, I'd worked around town, played at Rosie O'Grady's, started doing conventions, got to know the contractors in town. Disney had 400 full-time musicians there at the time. And now, 30 years later, they're down to 65, I think, full-time musicians. They've just cut a lot of the entertainment. When, as I understand it, just as I moved to town, operations, Disney World operations, had taken over entertainment.
Nice.
And they know nothing about entertainment. They're wondering why are all these people sitting around in between shows? They just did a 20-minute show, soaking wet from the heat and the humidity. Feels like 130 degrees outside. And they're wondering why we aren't doing something in between shows.
The bean counters.
Yeah, the bean counters.
Yeah.
This is wasted time. Make them fold shirts or something. And they did. They had a couple managers do that. So I survived Disney for 15 years doing all kinds of different jobs. Mm-hmm. And also working on the outside. And my last few years there was when I really started doing jazz parties and festivals, either as a solo, just a drummer that they invite to the jazz party, or I was working with a band called the Black Dogs, which was a great Dixieland band, best band I ever worked with. It was unbelievable, but kind of obscure, and nobody really knew about it other than the people in California at the festivals we played.
Right.
We had people lined up around the block. We sold 1,200 cassettes in 3 days at one time.
Wow.
Playing 3 sets a day. You couldn't hand them out fast enough. It was amazing. So that was a hugely popular band, and then the band leader stole all the money and then disbanded. But, there's all kinds of stories like that in the music business. Yeah, somebody gets greedy, and it really could have gone on to, because it was so different, it could have gone on to be like a warm-up act for major rock bands, because it was so different. Like Steely Dan, I love Steely Dan. I love that band. You never know who's going to play warm-up for them. Last time I saw them, they had an organ trio from Chicago, and they were just great. Guys you'd never even heard of, because Donald Fagen heard them playing in a bar somewhere in Chicago. Same with their drummer, Keith Carlock. He's huge now. They've heard him playing in a bar in New York, because they actually went to see the guitar player.
I see.
And he was playing drums with them. He's just a country boy from Mississippi now. He's James Taylor, Steely Dan, Eric Clapton. He's doing all these gigs. He's like Steve Gadd's sub. What a position that is to be in. And maybe if I'd stuck around New York, I could have done more stuff like that, or I could be on Broadway. A lot of my friends moved. John Allred, the greatest trombone player I know, is in New York playing in Broadway, sitting in the pits, making good money, making good pension, not having to be on the road. Yeah. That's a blessing these days, not having to deal with airports and airlines and stuff. Right. I'm not sick of it yet.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being on the road, I know you have to be on the road soon.
Yeah.
I just wanted to play.
What are you going to play?
I got to play. Let's see, what was I going to play here? I was going to play.
Oh, that's Bridging the Gap.
Yeah.
Oh, the Basie. It's completely improvised. We just said roll the tape. We followed Rosanna. Completely improvised.
And the title, the NER Blues?
Nicky Eddie Rosanna.
Okay.
And so that was my concept of we'll let it play. There's that dynamic thing we were talking about. And nobody does that better than Rosanna.
I told him yesterday there was. Oh, I know what it was. One of the recordings for St. Louis Blues you had done.
Oh yeah, that's an alive record.
Yeah, and there's one point where he sounds like he's the horn section of the Basie band. Yeah. He's playing the ba-da-do-ba, da-da. I know it.
He's amazing. Yeah. He's totally amazing. He has the technical prowess to play anything that comes to his mind, but he's heavily influenced by the older guys, Willie the Lion, Basie, Jelly Roll Morton, as players, Fats Waller as players. Basie, everybody thinks of him as just kind of going plink, 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 plink. He was the most feared guy on 52nd Street in his day. He could really play. Listen to Kid from Red Bank. It's unbelievable. He's playing stride. He studied with Fats Waller. So he knew how to do it. He just figured out, I don't have to kill myself. I got this whole band here. I just fill in the little holes. It became his trademark. So he never broke a sweat again. Which is kind of nice. It saves your clothes on the road. That was my dilemma when I was on the road. I was a young guy, I'd never really been on the road. Playing with a big band, sweating profusely every night to keep clothes fresh. This is a great story. So at one point we're in California, San Francisco, and Harold Jones, the drummer, shows up. He was with, I think, Natalie Cole at the time. They were on break. So he came to see the band as all his old buddies. Because Harold was on the Live at Birdland record and Standing Ovation record, I think, also. Great Basie drummer. He said, "You want to know something?" What? He said, "Papa Joe Jones told me, wear T-shirts underneath your dress shirt." He goes, "The T-shirts, you can buy them anywhere. And if they get nasty, you just throw them out and buy another one." He goes, "Your dress shirts, you can get it 3 or 4 nights out of a dress shirt if you wear a T-shirt." He says, "And don't wear that shirt on the bus to the gig, only change at the gig. He goes, because nobody can smell you from the audience. And it doesn't matter that the other guys could smell your nasty shirt. You're getting 4 days out of a dress shirt. Survival on the road. And to this day,
Look at that.
I wear t-shirts. Guys, how do you wear those? They're so constraining. I said, because I can get 4 nights out of a dress shirt. How many nights do you get out of a dress shirt when you don't wear a t-shirt? 1. Okay, there you go. So things like that. Warren Boucher told me how to fold a suit that he had learned, I think Benny Golson or somebody that taught him that, maybe Clark. You can fold up a suit inside out and not have any wrinkles. So you didn't see guys with big suitcases back then. You saw them with a little suitcase. Now, of course, a lot of guys wore coat and tie when they traveled back then anyway. Bucky still does.
Yeah.
And John Pizzarelli. Every picture I see on Facebook, John Pizzarelli's wearing a suit.
Yeah, Joe Wilder, all those guys.
Yeah, they put a suit on every day. Yeah, I don't know. But fold up a suit jacket with no wrinkles in a little carry-on bag. Nice.
Nice. And you actually answered the question. I didn't even get. I was going to
What?
say, you have any advice for up and coming musicians?
Wear a t-shirt.
Wear a t-shirt.
And listen.
And
Listen to everybody that's around you. I'd say take that little mixing board in your head. If you look at a mixing board and you know what it's like, there's usually a solo button or a mute button for each channel. So think of each instrument as having its own little channel. You want to hear more trumpet? Press that solo button in your head. The trumpet comes right to you. You want to hear more bass? Hit that, So that's how I try and explain it to kids about listening. The listening was so ingrained into me about listening to what's going on, because drums are a support instrument. We get our chance to play our solos, but we're in a support role. Drums and bass. We're supporting everybody else, and our job is to make them sound as good as possible, because I don't want to be standing out there playing a horn. I like to hide in my cage behind the drums, standing out front. I've gotten better about it, but playing solos and stuff, but I'd rather try and make somebody sound good in a support role. That's part of a team effort. If you think of it as a sports team, everybody knows their role. And you just go out and play your role. And keep your ears open and being able to respond instantly to anything that might come on. Rhythmically, harmonically, whatever it is. Change of style, change of feel. I like to pride myself in the thing I can play just about any style that's thrown my way, from rock to funk to R&B to Latin to gospel to whatever, And so I immerse myself into the music. I'd love to have a Steely Dan gig. Yeah. Please.
Me too.
Yeah.
You like all the same stuff I do.
Yeah, I love it.
Right.
And so that Bridging the Gap record had the rock influence from pop, more pop, not rock, but pop influence. Stevie Wonder, Overjoyed, was always just one of my favorite songs, and Rosanna tackled it and did a great job on it.
Well, on
Then
that note,
doing a Fifth Dimension song.
yeah.
One Less Bell. I said, Nikki, can you sing this? She said, it's funny, my teacher just mentioned this song to me. Great. She said, okay, we'll do it. And there it is.
Yeah.
So, concept
Well,
of doing...
you have big ears, not literally, but
Thank
you
you.
know what I mean.
Yeah.
And that's great.
I think it's really important, especially for rhythm section guys. You're playing in a trumpet section or an orchestra, you have to listen to what's going on. You got to listen to your section leader. You got to match their pitch, whether it's right or wrong. You got to match their pitch. Sorry, you got to follow the conductor.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple when you think about it. Some guys make it too complicated.
Well, thanks for your time today.
Thank you,
And
Mike.
last night.
It's great.
And best of luck in your
Anytime.
travels. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Over and out.
Beautiful.